Nothing can give you more than what you already have, period. Transformation, fundamentally speaking, is so much more about unbecoming, undoing, and unlearning than it is about becoming, doing, or developing. It's our beliefs that drive our thoughts, and our thoughts dictate our attitude, our energy, how we show up, and then our actions and our decision, which is what gets us all of our results.
Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. So glad you're here today. I have a great guest, and we're going to talk a lot about love in this one. And that is the title of my guest's book, Let Love In. Jake Kauffman is an international transformation coach and spiritual mentor to purpose-driven, visionary men and entrepreneurs who are seeking to grow in their life and leadership. He has supported hundreds of men to thrive and reach the next level in all areas of life, business, and relationships. And his mission is to help men to radically heal and transform so that they can achieve their full potential and fulfill their purpose. And so his new book, as I just mentioned, is Let Love In. The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts. And it's available now on Amazon. So go over there and pick that up. But welcome my guest, Jake. Thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you being here.
Adam, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too, because I've been really excited researching you and listening to you on other shows and just your story. It's incredible what you're doing to help men in particular in terms of reaching their ultimate potential. I think we share a passion on that understanding that that people are not really unlocking that ultimate potential, and there's an obstacle in their way.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we could start there. I think we have a common view that there is a better version of us down the line. What are the obstacles that we're running into most often, and how should we be approaching those?
Sure. Well, I want to challenge the notion of this more idealized version of ourselves that lives in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing can give you more than what you already have. Period. The reason I want to challenge the notion, right? Because that's not to say that we can't, it's a paradox, right?
Right.
So our egoic brain struggles to make sense of it. Like, what do you mean? You're telling me that like I can't improve? No, I'm not. What I'm saying is the inherent trap that so many people fall into is associating happiness, joy, and fulfillment when they reach this more idealized version of themselves in the future. Because what are they inherently saying? They're saying that my joy, my happiness, my fulfillment is not available to me in this present moment. It's off in the future somewhere, right?
Yeah, right.
Upon having accomplished a certain thing, achieving a certain milestone. And I can tell you definitively from experience that is just not true. Perfect example from my story. Roughly 10 years ago, I started a healthcare technology company with a couple of other guys. Of course, big aspirations, highly ambitious. And, with startups, the odds are very much stacked against you. Over 92% of businesses fail within the first couple of years. So when we reached, a 7-figure business, I was like, of course, I'm going to be like so happy. But that didn't change the way that I felt. That didn't change the way that I felt about myself. It did for a minute. We went out and celebrated and, had dinner and had drinks and, cheers to our success. But then I went right back to and reverted right back to exactly the way that I had felt. So, and that just continued. 7-figure business, check. Multiple 7-figure business, check. 8-figure business, check. Why do I still feel the same way? And arguably worse. right? Because that creates suffering. Because whenever you say that my joy, my happiness, my fulfillment is somewhere off in the future, upon having realized a more idealized version of myself or my life or my circumstances, you create what? You create time.
Yeah.
And in that is suffering, because you are saying that my joy, my happiness is not available to me in this moment right now.
So that time frame that you're creating there is basically saying you are not where you want to be, and therefore you're going to be unhappy in this moment. So happiness, then we have to find that happiness in that moment. So how do we reconcile that? Yeah. So how do we reconcile that when we want to strive to be better than we are now, but we also want to live that in this moment? What does that look like?
Well, the first half of life, it's very much about dualistic thinking, either or thinking, which is just that, which is what we've been describing. If this, then that, or when this, then that. Once I accomplish said thing, reach said milestone, then I will be happy, then I will be fulfilled, then I will be at peace. Non-dualistic thinking says that I can do and hold both. I can be ambitious and strive, forward in the future and create or set goals for myself. But those things do not dictate and determine my happiness. My happiness, my joy, my peace, my fulfillment, all of those things are available to me in this moment. I simply need to create the space for them.
Yeah.
In order to access them. Right? I need to get out of my own way, essentially.
Right.
Because, think about how this actually plays itself out practically, tangibly speaking, in our society. Right? What have people done, especially, the boomers, for example? The trap that they've fallen into is working really hard for 30 or 40 years so that they can then enjoy their life upon retirement. Right. And then, of course, millennials and, what generation are we in? Gen X, Gen Z, or something like that.
Yeah.
They're coming along and they're like, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, that you're waiting to travel and see the world and really enjoy your life and putting it off until you're in your mid 60s. That doesn't
especially when the risk. Yeah, especially when the risk is there. That you can't even reach that. Yeah.
Of course, that you could die at any moment.
Right.
That tomorrow is never guaranteed. And so we came along and we're like, that doesn't make a ton of sense. I'm going to travel. I'm going to enjoy my life now, because it is available to me in this moment. It comes down to a matter of focus and priority. So when we think about this notion or this concept of living up to our true potential, similarly speaking, one of the biggest lies that we've bought into, right alongside, if this, then that thinking, or when this happens, then this will happen thinking, is this notion that we can somehow achieve our way to our full potential. That could not be further from the truth, because transformation, fundamentally speaking, is so much more about unbecoming, undoing, and unlearning than it is about becoming, doing, or developing. To quote the famous poet Rumi, our primary task should not be to seek after love, but to seek after and find all of the barriers within us that stand against it. You could say the same thing for success. Or for happiness, for example, our primary task should not be to seek after success, but to seek after and find all of the barriers within us that stand against it. And this speaks exactly and precisely into how this conversation started in the first place, which was the things that get in the way of us and our true success or happiness and fulfillment. Right? So much of us run to, what do I need to do in order to amplify my happiness or my success? as opposed to asking ourselves the question, what is it within me that currently blocks me from experiencing those things? And this is why I say to my clients all the time, and for those of you who are listening, just, play along with me here for a moment. Anger is the key to happiness.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
The more I work through, and reconcile my anger, the more I open myself up to experience happiness, because anger blocks happiness.
You
could
so
say
it's
the
the
same.
working through. Yeah. So it's the working through of that.
Yes,
Gotcha.
it's the working through the anger. It's working through and healing from the experience that created the anger in the first place. That then opens me up and allows me to further experience happiness. Or, in the case of my book, Let Love In. I could have titled it like Let Success In, Let Happiness In, Let Abundance In. I chose to go with love. But you could say the same thing for all of those things. So the more I work through, reconcile, and break through the barriers within me that stand against those things, an amplified experience of those things is just a natural side effect. It's a byproduct.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, the way that you frame that, because one of the things I hope to convey to people through the show is the fact that fear is not really an enemy. Fear is something that we do have to work through that can lead us to greater achievement of our potential. It sounds like other negative, or what we perceive as negative feelings like anger or frustration or other things are just those kinds of same things, signals that we may have to just work through. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, at immature levels of development, what do we do when we experience fear? We typically tend to run from it.
Yeah.
Right. Or we need to conquer it. We need to overcome it, because in doing so, we experience some level of self-validation or increased self-importance, right?
Yeah.
We use it to bolster the ego.
Right.
Where at proper levels of development, or better put, more mature levels of development, we see fear as a friend. We see fear as a teacher. We allow ourselves to sit inside of it and be molded and transformed by it. It's not an enemy. We don't need to resist it, because what we resist persists. We don't need to overcome it or conquer it because we've got something to prove. We've got something to protect, right? When young boys, they need to do that, to be clear. And as a father, this on some inherent level, sons need to feel that, like, I have what it takes, right? I can make dad proud, right? I can earn dad's love, and that's why if you read anything about, men's work or male initiation, rites of passage, the love of an earthly father at its best is inherently conditional. It is. Like, young boys need to know that on some level they can earn it, they can achieve it, so that they can develop this healthy ego structure, right? You have to have an ego to be able to let go of an ego.
Right.
Right? So they can properly develop, or in the beginning, they can compensate so that eventually they can decompensate. So they can break out of this proving phase or stage and wake up to the bigger picture. Right? Which is all about purpose. It's not about proving anything. It's not about protecting anything. It's all about purpose and transformation and transcendence.
So if we're able to work through a lot of those negative perceived emotions, we are better equipped to get closer to finding our purpose.
Absolutely, because the ego wants nothing more than to maintain the status quo. It hides in the familiar.
Yeah.
But purpose really requires faith, right? It requires a leap of faith. I imagine you starting this podcast on some level was a leap of faith that said, you know what, I'm gonna invest a significant amount of time, energy, effort, potentially even money into this endeavor. that I don't know if it's going to make any money, if it's going to be profitable. And maybe that wasn't even your goal, but regardless, and nevertheless, it did require a leap of faith in saying that I'm going to try to do this thing with no guarantee that it's going to be any success, whether that's material or otherwise. And I'm going to do it. Well, faith always feels like falling, and falling always feels like dying. Right? But, when we're in this proving, protecting phase or stage of development, we want nothing to do with that. Right.
Right.
We operate with what we can see, what we know, what we can prove, right? Which is just to say we operate from a place of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful to hear that, because the ego part, I know that it's useful in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a protective mechanism for it, but
correct.
But there, that balance that we have with faith, I mean, faith is so critical in those elements of how we grow, how we move into what we want to be, or even being happy now. I love that concept of removing obstacles, not so we can be happy in the future, but removing obstacles so that we can find it right now. I love that part.
Yeah, totally. Because if you sit down with people, I promise you this, I've been doing that. I've been coaching men for so long. And you sit down with them and you ask them what they really want to be doing, rarely is it ever what they're actually doing.
Right.
It's so true. Because they have some story, they have some internalized self-limiting belief or story about themselves, about their current abilities, about their current capacity or their current circumstances, that they can't do what they really want to be doing right now. I actually had a conversation recently with one of my clients. He's significantly more successful than me. And he was talking to me about my business, and he meant well. And he's like, well, you could do this and you could do that, like to scale things and make it bigger, make more money. And I'm like, okay, let's go down that path for a second. So that I can do what? Right. Well, so that you can play more golf and, travel more. And I'm like, I do those things already. I don't need any more money to do more of those things. I do those things already. I'm not caught up in this egoic game of needing to, kick the can down the road on my happiness and my fulfillment. And this is not to take pride in myself whatsoever, but it's just to show what's possible for us when we die to this ego. I mean, I think the Bible speaks so eloquently to this, regardless of what you believe about Jesus. When I believe it was Paul who said, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. I'm convinced that what he was talking about was the ego. It is no longer I who live, like my ego who's running the show. It is God, it is faith, it is belief in a higher power, and it's dedication to a higher purpose that is what's driving me. Not the money game, not the success game, because we've proven time and time again that is super empty. Just talk to someone that's hyper successful; they'll tell you they've got a ton of. Netflix just released a documentary on this, about the pervasive fundamental unhappiness that is rampant amongst the world's richest people. It's so terrible.
Yeah, it's terrifying and it's tragic in a lot of ways, and I can understand that and see that was a bit of your own story too, because we strive to reach this thing and we realize it doesn't make us happy, and we're almost starting from scratch. And that kind of gets to another question I had for you, or another area I wanted to take this, because you'd mentioned that or you've mentioned in some of your content that it's not really the business challenges necessarily, but the personal challenges we face that hold us back. Is that accurate? And can you expand on that a bit?
Oh man, I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah.
All of our behaviors, all of our external behaviors, our actions and our decisions are driven by, motivated by our beliefs and our identity. So if you think about that, it's our beliefs that drive our thoughts, and our thoughts dictate our attitude, our energy, how we show up, and then our actions and our decisions, which is what gets us all of our results, right? So when we go about making a change, or we come to that point within ourselves where we say to ourselves, I'm made for more, meant for more, whatever that internal narrative is that inspires someone to change, to want to change, and then that usually happens either by way of great love or great suffering. The typical approach is to change or make a change at the level of behavior. That never works long term. Take, for example, New Year's resolutions. Today is December 6th. So the new year is right around the corner. Everyone's kind of starting to think, new year, new me, set goals for themselves for 2024 so that it's the best year ever, right? It's the same narrative every single year. But statistics show, I believe, by March 1st, I think over 80% of people have essentially abandoned their New Year's resolutions. And I believe by the end of the year, so December 31st of 2024, over 90% of people will have failed to accomplish their New Year's resolutions, right? And it's not because the goals were too big or unrealistic, but it's because they failed to be consistent with them. Why is that? Why is that? What is the disease? The symptom is the fact that, like, for example, and as a metaphor, they just stopped going to the gym, right? They stopped taking the necessary actions in order to accomplish their goals, right? On the surface, egoically, in order to maintain the status quo, our ego is just going to oversimplify it and say, well, it's because you didn't go to the gym. You stopped, right? Well, but that's the symptom. The disease is deeper than that, right? The source of that behavior is rooted in one's beliefs and identity. And this is why you cannot outperform your identity.
Mm-hmm. So we fail.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. So we're failing. To summarize, is because we're trying to attack the behavior and not the identity or the belief.
Treat the symptom and not the disease. Correct. Okay. Absolutely. Which is, and I said this to you before we hit record, and you got a good laugh about it. It's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's all it is. That's all it is. And so many studies back this up. If you hire a coach, and I'm sure some of your listeners are thinking about that or in the act of doing that right now, heading into 2024, so that they can be supported, so that they can have accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Statistics show that after the coaching has been removed, you are 90%. Statistics show that you are 90% likely to return to your former level of behavior, and therefore results.
Right.
90%. That's staggering.
Yeah.
That's staggering because and it's nothing to do with the individual. Of course, they're well-intentioned in hiring a coach. They wouldn't hire a coach if they weren't committed to their growth on some inherent level. Mm-hmm. The problem is the approach to getting them to change, to creating the transformation within them necessary to sustain the new behavior and the new results that come with that new level of behavior is incomplete and insufficient because we are simply treating the symptoms and not the disease.
Mm-hmm. So what is the solution to that as people do go into their New Year's resolutions, and maybe we even just throw out the idea of a New Year's resolution, stop tying it to a date or whatever it may be. But how do we attack that the disease?
Well, everyone wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Yeah, everyone wants the resurrection, but nobody wants the crucifixion. It's a tale as old as time, right? Everybody wants transformation, but nobody really wants anything to do with the healing that's required to achieve transformation, because we have to heal before we transform. That's kind of the order of things. If we hope for it to be sustainable if we want it to be long lasting. And that's essentially at the core and the essence of what I was saying earlier. Our task should not be to seek after love, but to seek after and find all of the barriers within us that stand against it. Right? If you think about the common approach to increasing love and intimacy and connection in a relationship, what's the predominant advice? Go on more dates, court your wife, like et cetera, et cetera. But that does nothing to address the internal narrative, the stories and the beliefs within that person that cause them to, say, for example, put up barriers to love and intimacy in the relationship in the first place, right? Or to stop speaking their truth, communicating their needs, saying what it is that they really want, for example, right? Breaking through one's codependency or passivity or people-pleasing tendencies, right? That's what blocks love, intimacy, and connection in relationship. Not like, oh, we forgot to go out on our monthly date night, or our weekly date night. That's not what does it. That's not what does it. It's all this internal stuff that then causes us not to prioritize that connection, and treat it as a non-negotiable, for instance. And so, right, we have to go to work within ourselves, because the best way for the ego to maintain the status quo is to hide the truth from us about what's really driving the ship, what's really, orchestrating the show. And that's where nobody wants to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's precisely where you need to go. The things that you don't want to talk about are exactly the things that you need to talk about, which is why I feel that the breakthrough that everyone is looking for is found in the work that they're avoiding.
Yeah. It's like the dark forest. It's the place you need to go into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is what has most men, and I say this with so much almost sadness. It has most men performing their way over top of their pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I need to get my shit together. So I'm going to stop eating like crap. I'm going to wake up earlier. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to rededicate myself to my health and fitness.
Hey everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We get distracted. We face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide and enjoy the journey.
Not that any of that is bad inherently, because it's not. And I would encourage it.
Right.
Right. But it has so many men performing their way around their problems rather directly into them and what is ultimately responsible for their problems, which is within them. And most of it, if you're familiar with trauma work, most of it, if not all of it, stems back to early childhood and relationship with mom and dad.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of this is resonating because you can look back in I can look back at my own life and realize where I've done that as well. Recovering from alcoholism, where, healing was that first necessary step before any kind of transformation takes place. But I also look at other areas where it's like, yeah, I'm trying to achieve my way out of like my personal pain. Yeah. And so I see that, and I see that as a way of like, you can actually celebrate. You're trying to celebrate yourself, and validate like this, like, no, I'm not feeling the pain because look at what I'm doing. And so,
Right. Yeah, you're trying to solve for the ego with the ego, which only gives you a more cleverly disguised and strongly reinforced ego. That's it.
Yeah.
It's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You think you're doing some good work and you get some results to show for it, right? You like lose 20 pounds and, you quit the alcohol, but like, did you actually address, and I know that at least from what you described, you did this, but did you actually address the internal component within you that is ultimately behind what drove you to the bottle in the first place?
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of deep work that goes into that. And I guess that's where the healing part of it comes at. So you would recommend that obviously people are looking at first addressing the healing aspects, digging in deep to find that disease. And that kind of gets to the true, it seems to be getting to the idea, the thing that we were talking about before we jumped on, which was the true self, false self, kind of thing. So balancing that authentically, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, personal development at its highest form has to start the conversation with dying. What does that mean? What does that look like? In dying to my ego, my need for validation, right? My need for attention, right? The ego, one of its primary goals is just looking good.
Right.
So all you got to do is go on social media and you see it's all over the place. Everyone's just trying to look good.
Oh yeah.
Right. and position like the most idealized version of themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. By the way, this will all be on social media as well. So
fantastic. I mean, don't get me wrong. Social media is like an incredible tool to connect with people. I mean, you and I wouldn't be connected if it weren't for social media. And we're having this really beautiful conversation, which is so important to have. And social media made that possible. But, too much of any good thing is still a bad thing. But, personal development at its highest form has to start the conversation with dying. If it doesn't, you need to get rid of it. Richard Rohr, the famous Franciscan friar and author, he talks about how he's convinced that all religion is meant to bring us into relationship with our true self, and if it doesn't, we need to dispose of it or redeem it. And so, I firmly believe that we have to go through this dying process where we die to the ego, where we die to this need to be significant, this need to be important, best, right, moral, significant, whatever you want to say, so that we can ultimately then be brought into a relationship with a higher purpose and a higher power, because that is truly the only thing that lasts, and seemingly the only thing that ultimately fulfills people long term. It's got to be bigger than me, right? It's got to be bigger than me. And if it's not, you're likely to find yourself in my position, or at least the position that I was in my late 20s, where I was, highly successful, but I was left empty and wanting, because all of my success was ego driven. It was all this unconscious attempt to claim victory over the pain that was created when I was sexually abused at 12 years old.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get into that story a little bit, because I know that's the kind of the genesis too of your book, Let Love In. And to that point in time where you have that success, you found the pinnacle of what you thought it was. What was the trigger? What was the where was that decision point made that you said, hey, I'm not happy, I need some other form of transformation? Or did it happen gradually?
Yep.
What triggered it?
Oh, this brings us into, great love or great suffering, which is the thing that we kind of all need to, prompt us or push us into transformation. And, great love, great love pretty much boils down to great suffering, because if you've ever been in love,
Yeah.
Great suffering.
Right.
You haven't really had an authentic experience with love until you've kind of had your heart broken, whatever that looks like, whether you've been betrayed, whether you've been broken up with, or whether there's just a fundamental loss of relationship. And so for me, it was kind of this slow, progressive drift off the path, if you will. And I was so consumed with work that I didn't go home and visit my mother on Mother's Day, even though I promised her that I would come home to celebrate with her and the rest of my family. And I called to tell her that. And she was like, Jake, I don't even know who you are anymore. And like, to hear that from your mother, just like, ugh.
Right.
And, just like it woke something up in me that forced me to look at my life and really take stock of who I had become, because there was an extreme delta at that point in my life, if I'm being really honest, between who I actually was and who I aspired to be. Or in other words, who I felt like I was meant to be. And, that delta, in that delta is tension. There is. And so the longer I ignored, the reality of the situation, like my addiction, right? My addiction was to work and to looking good and to being hyper successful. Like, as long as I ignored my addiction to that, I was just going to keep on suffering or inflicting suffering on other people. And so this is all in my book, that prompted me to say, you know what, I need to do something about it. I need to change. I need to make a change. I know that I'm meant for more. I know I'm better than this. I know that I'm capable of so much more, despite what I've experienced or despite what I've accomplished already in my career. Because I'm unhappy, I'm unfulfilled. I don't feel peace within myself. I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm not prioritizing the relationships that I say mean the most to me, or that ought to mean the most to me. So I need to make a change. And that's really what kicks off the book, kicks off my personal development journey, because that drove me to therapy and to ultimately going down the road of personal development, which is then what had me acknowledge the experience that I went through at 12 years old as sexual abuse. I didn't dissociate, I didn't suppress or repress the incident and then all of a sudden like remembered it for the first time, which is very common in therapy. I simply acknowledged it for what it was. I fully remembered the incident. I just shoved it out of my mind as best I could and coped through the pursuit of power, possession, prestige, all that stuff. And it wasn't until that I acknowledged that for what it was that I was able to connect the dots, that I was able to see, all of this behavior, all of these masks that I have unconsciously taken on, acting as if I was successful, even though, my relationships were not very good. And I was unhappy, unfulfilled, not at peace. It just all came crumbling down at that point, and that's kind of what needs to happen is all this stuff that, we work so hard to build in the first half of life just kind of has to prove to leave us, empty and wanting.
Yeah. So you discovered, and so you mentioned a little earlier too, that a lot of those challenges that I guess maybe our egos try to suppress as we go old happen in childhood. So yours was with this sexual abuse. Is that correct? And it took you to actually getting to that point where you're in therapy, where you have this crisis of relationships to kind of discover how that impacted you to that point.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. because it caused me to push love away. It caused me to push connection away, because after I was abused on some very fundamental level, love felt unsafe. And so regardless of whether or not you've been through some big T trauma like abuse, assault, or something like that, we've all been through trauma, because trauma is much more about how we internalize what happens to us and the beliefs and the stories that we make up about ourselves, other people, and the world, that then follows us throughout the course of our lives, and becomes the basis by which we create, manifest, attract everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as you discovered that, you work through that, did you discover that, so based on the title of the book, Let Love In, did you find that opening yourself up to love, how did that process go? And what did that look like? And how has that changed your life?
Well, it's both slow and terrible, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. It was a death, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Because, I mean, as you can probably imagine, I attracted a lot of shallow relationships, and was attracted to a lot of shallow relationships that were void of connection, at least intimate, vulnerable, emotional connection. Because I was scared to go there. I was both scared to go there within myself, and I was also scared to go there with the other person. And so over time, as you can probably imagine, I felt more comfortable opening up. I felt more comfortable stepping into vulnerability. I felt more comfortable sharing. And so that created, as you can probably imagine, a significant degree of intimacy in my relationships over time. And so that just continued, and still continues to this day. I'm not saying that I don't struggle anymore. That would be a stretch. I still have my own struggles, just like the next person, but my ego is actively working to push people away for the sake of not needing to be vulnerable, for the sake of not opening up and connecting, because I think we can all agree a romantic relationship, or even any relationship of substance for that matter, really requires those things in order to thrive, in order to be healthy. And so it wasn't until I started working through these things that the resistance around letting people in, letting people see me, sharing openly, exposing these like less than desirable aspects of myself to not just my romantic partners, but to friends, to family members, for example, and allowing that to come to the surface, only then was I really able to have a genuine experience of love. Because how can you say that you love something until you've experienced it at its worst?
Oh yeah. 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 And that's so true. I mean, it's terrible to think about, but it's also so beautiful to think about, that you have to go through the heartbreak and the torture and the torment, the suffering that you say, to experience the bliss, the beauty of it, and all of that.
Yeah, you can't know joy without suffering.
Right. Yeah.
That's the contrast is what creates the experience for us, right? Life would be meaningless if there was no end, right? Death,
right?
Death,
right.
Death awakens us to life. It's what allows us to see life as such a precious, fragile gift, because there is an end, because we are finite, and this all eventually is going to come to an end. The same is true for joy and suffering. It's the law of polarity, right? The light, the dark of everything. Everything in the universe has an opposite. So, the title of this podcast is Flow Over Fear, right? Faith and fear, they go together. So success and failure, they go together. So when you push away one, you push away both, right? Rejection, acceptance, they go together. When you push away one, you push away both. And that's what I was doing. I was pushing away love or acceptance because I was so scared of being hurt and rejected, because I had experienced so much hurt and rejection when I was abused.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can share so much in your experience as far as living with as being able to appreciate the goodness that comes from things like love and connection and from the suffering that you might have experienced there. Because I'll say that, being numb is just no way to live. Whatever we might be doing to numb ourselves is almost the ultimate form of suffering. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Well, we always want more of what doesn't work. It's the true addict's creed. And, if you believe the psychotherapist Gabor Mate, 90% of people are addicted to something. The other 10% are just lying about it. Right.
Yeah.
Whether it's pornography, drugs, alcohol, or whether it's looking good, whether it's the need to be significant, shopping, the internet, social media, work, money, success, fill in the blank, so we always want more of what doesn't work. True sobriety is really, really the only thing that can allow us to fully experience all that life has to offer. And that's not to say that you cannot enjoy things, responsibly. That's not to say that you can't have a glass of wine, here and then. Of course, life is a dance, right? It's following the path, staying on the path, falling off of it is a part of it, right? We learn how to walk by falling down. We learn how to get it right by doing it wrong. So it's this ever flowing dance, and so, right, losing it to find it, for example, right? The Bible has 3 parables about this, right? The sheep, the coin, and the prodigal son, right? It's like this ever rediscovering, right? We have to think that, what is available to us here, it's not. It's available somewhere else, only to return and to ultimately realize, emphasis on the real, that what I was looking for was always here.
Yeah. 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 It's, I love that perspective on it. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it helps the audience to get that perspective of just, knowing that, that there's never, like, kind of what you said, going back to what you said at the beginning, there's never really an arrival. I mean, you're always kind of moving in a direction, right? So we have to keep moving in that direction.
Right. There's nothing that can give you more of what you already have.
Yeah. I love that. That's so powerful. So what do you hope that people get from the book, Let Love In? What are you hoping that people can gather from that?
Well, I hope it gives them a sense of peace and allow them to increase their capacity to experience love, because, if you believe in a higher purpose or a higher power on some inherent level, so much of faith, of religion, is this realization that, like, my deepest DNA is love, right? My deepest DNA is love. And, despite the world that we live in, where the ego is, like, very relieved to have an enemy, where it's all about us versus them, this very tribalistic world that we live in, where we're, warring with ourselves. And there's this, as Richard Rohr says, this cult of innocence, right? This cult of innocence, which only leads to dead ends, right? It's them, it's not us, right? I'm innocent, I'm right, I'm moral. That's the ego. My hope is that people ultimately have an authentic experience with grace and with love, that they're brought into the deepest, most authentic relationship with themselves in a way that puts them on the path towards a higher purpose and a higher power, because that's what we're all meant for. At the end of the day, is we're all wired for transcendence. Right? You think about, like, I know that I'm capable of so much more, right? I know that I'm meant for a bigger purpose, a bigger mission, right? That's hardwired into all of us. And yet the vast majority of people, they ignore that subtle whisper. They never really respond to this call that says, you know what? I'm going to allow myself to be secretly seduced by that which I love the most. Whatever that is for you. Whether it's golf, whether it's painting, whether it's writing, whatever it may be. I'm going to allow myself to be just fully wrapped up in the pursuit of that, and figure out if I can monetize it. You don't have to. I'm very entrepreneurial minded, so I'm kind of coming into the conversation from that space, which is how can I make my passion and my vocation one? The Japanese called this, your ikigai, your reason for being. And so I think that what prevents people from realizing that, from bringing that into reality, it's their pain. And it's the stories and the beliefs, the self-limiting beliefs and stories that get in the way of them actually pursuing those things.
Yeah. And I like that perspective, because you could see in yourself that you were able to find that perfect ikigai, that combination of that passion and what will make you money. Because coming from that place where you were making 8 figures and not happy, to actually kind of resetting, did you find that that ability to mix the passion with the ability to build the relationships, to lean into love, and to continue making the money that you want to make? Have you found that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, a part of this work is in realizing your gift or your gifting. On some inherent level, I believe that's divinely given. And if you're familiar with the concept of epigenetics, it speaks to a lot of this, where we, for example, with addiction, this idea that alcohol is genetic, that's not actually true. What's genetic is the predisposition to addiction. That's true because of the DNA that we acquire from our parents, because of the healing work that they've done, or the lack of healing work that they've done, that then predisposes us to need a coping mechanism, right? I believe the same thing is true when it comes to our gift, our purpose. We're wired in a certain way, that we're given this unique gifting, but that we need to be stewards of. And for me, that has always been writing. I've always been attracted to this concept, that Hemingway spoke about, that writing's really easy. You just sit down at a keyboard and you let your heart bleed. It's so romantic. And so I was always just attracted to that. And in a world that's craving authenticity now more than ever, right? We want what's real, because social media is it's giving us this microcosm of what is real. It's not the full picture. And we all know it, right? We all know it on some very deep level. And so whenever you see someone openly talking about their struggles, what they're going through, what they're wrestling with, the statistics when it comes to anxiety, depression, and suicide are higher than ever before. So you can see that people are craving this, but in order to have that, I have to attack and go to war against the things within me that stand against that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful. And I love that. And I love that you put that medium out there in the form of a book, because, and that, especially in this world where I 100% agree with you, the world is craving authenticity, whether they know it or not. And we're not being given it in enough of a format. And a lot of that format of being authentic, I think it requires a long form format, like a book, like a podcast. Yeah. So,
absolutely. Yeah, totally. Because, this is substantial, right?
Yes.
Because, what is it like TikTok. Like you have like the attention span of the average human is like less than a goldfish sees. It's like 6 seconds. There's no substance in that, right? There's no substance in that. It takes a high level of intentionality to like sit down and like grab a book and actually, go all the way through it and not just read it, but like savor it and really digest everything that it has to offer you. And then of course, implement it. It's a whole other conversation entirely. And that requires going slow and savoring something, just like you would savor like a really good steak,
Yeah.
You take your time with it.
Yeah. Well, now I'm hungry. So no,
I mean, most things are best enjoyed slow, like sex
Absolutely.
and eating and all that stuff,
Right.
And yet we're addicted to speed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's a perfect time for Let Love In to come into our world. And I would love for our listeners to go and pick up that book by Jake Kauffman. Jake, I'm so grateful that you spent some time today and shared your wisdom and authentically shared your story here. Where can people find you if they want to reach out? In addition to buying the book, Let Love In, where do you want people to find you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So just a side note, the book is on Amazon. It is my full name. So it's Jacob Kauffman, Kauffman, Let Love In, The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts. The best way to connect with me, though, is on Instagram. I am Jake Kauffman. So JakeKauffman.
Awesome. Yeah. And don't forget the I am at the front of that. So I am Jake Kauffman on Instagram. And so check him out. Check him out there. He's got great content. I mean, and even for the short bursts of Instagram and things like that, there's just so much authenticity and value there that Jake's bringing to the world. And Jake, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for spending time with us. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining us today. And we will see you soon. Thanks again. Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.